wonder what the best news is that you've ever heard. I think back to my wife Natasha saying yes when I asked her to marry me, to my children being born, to getting jobs I thought I had no chance of getting, to my football team West Ham being promoted. Okay, maybe that one's pushing it a bit. But over the course of the next 18 months, we've chosen as a church to explore the Gospel of Matthew, which makes it pretty important to understand that word, gospel. The word itself comes from a Greek word, euangelion, which literally means good news. In the New Testament, it refers to the announcement that Jesus has brought the reign of God or God's kingdom to our world through his life, death, and then resurrection from the dead. Now, importantly, these Gospels are not merely historical accounts, but they're also narrative announcements, making the powerful claim that Jesus is the Messiah of Israel and the true Lord of the world. So we're not simply being introduced to historical events, but more importantly, being invited to recognize Jesus as our own Saviour and become one of his followers. Of course, another important point about good news is that it deserves telling more than once. And that's certainly true for the gospel accounts of Jesus that we find in the New Testament. We know them as Gospels or good news according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 4 people, each recording their version of events as they saw them and helping the original readers and us build a picture of who Jesus is and why following him is hands down the best thing we could ever do. But why include all 4 accounts in the Bible, you might ask? Why not just pick the best one and be done with it? Well, first of all, you'd have to work out how to choose the best one. But more importantly, if Jesus really is the Son of God, wouldn't you want to know as much about him as possible? And perhaps there are specific things that had struck each writer that they wanted to share. We can see some clues for this even in the first verse of each Gospel. Matthew, an account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Mark, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Luke, since many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I too decided, as one having a grasp of everything from the start, to write a well-ordered account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may have a firm grasp of the words in which you have been instructed. And then finally there's John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. If we go back to Mark, we find one of the most strongest opening statements that you might find, and almost certainly a direct challenge to the Roman powers in the ancient Middle East, who would have considered Caesar Augustus or Emperor Nero to have been a god. The beginning of the good news for the world is not the Roman emperor, but Jesus, the Messiah. But when we look at Luke, we find his opening is written in a more judicial or legal tone. In fact, his whole approach comes across as that of an investigator, seeking to understand the facts about Jesus so that Theophilus, the person he's writing to, can have a firm grasp of who Jesus is. Importantly, Luke was also likely non-Jewish, which adds another flavour to his writing. And then there's John, one of Jesus' followers, And his opening, likely written much later than the other three, is very different. This poetic beginning orients the narrative away from biography and history to wisdom, to some drama, to metaphor. John wants to reveal who Jesus is over the course of the whole of his book, in stark contrast to Mark, for example. And then, of course, there's Matthew, writing his good news for a Jewish audience, hence son of David getting a mention right up front, suggesting right from the get-go that the story of Jesus is part of a bigger story about Israel, which is found across the whole of the Bible. You can watch the next video to find out more about that. But it's just one of the reasons we chose Matthew as the gospel that we'd study in depth, because it so often refers back to the Old Testament, helping us understand who Jesus is as part of the bigger story of the whole Bible. Of course, we'll still refer to those other Gospels of Mark and Luke and John, especially where there are significant similarities or differences even in the accounts. So, there's a simple introduction to the Gospels. On the website, you'll find some links to further watching or reading. And let me encourage you, get stuck in from the start and start reading the book of Matthew, even if it's only a small amount at a time. We're looking forward to taking this journey with you over the coming weeks and months, offering some good news for you and some good news to share with everyone else.